declare the meeting open and ask you, Councillor Plum, to lead us in prayer.
Almighty God, we acknowledge that we have a responsibility to look after your creation, especially this region we call Barcaldine Regional Council. We are also conscious that our decisions are going to affect deeply the lives, land and property of the people we have come here to serve. Remind us to exercise respect for each of our fellow councillors, staff and for the people of our region. Help us in this meeting to act wisely, justly and intelligently in all our deliberations. Thank you, Lord, for the privilege of both leading and serving, and assist us to do this well. Amen. Amen.
We have condolences from Alan Wills, formerly of Aramac and Barcaldine, Arthur Winter of Barcaldine, Ethel Anderson of Alpha, formerly. Is there any more?
Mrs. Belmer, Arthur, formerly Barcaldine.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, did we want to make mention of the passing of the Isaac?
Oh, sorry, we definitely did. Councillors, Division 6 Councillor for Isaac's Regional Council, Councillor Lynn Jones, tragically lost her life after a very short battle with an aggressive form of cancer. Her service was just held recently, but it's not often, fortunately, it's not often that a sitting councillor loses their life. So we'll also mark the respect to Councillor Lynn Jones, please.
Did we mention Dave Mason last meeting?
Yes.
We did.
Thank you. All councillors are present, but I acknowledge the District Manager for Alpha, Jericho, Damien's absence today, so apologise for his inability to attend. I'll take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and their elders, both past, present and emerging. I also now call for declarations of prescribed conflict of interest, to start with the Deputy Mayor.
No.
Councillor Plum.
Yes, I would like to inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in 3.4.2 in section 1.3, 3.4.5 in section 7, and 3.6.1 in theme 2, number 1.
Sorry, 3.6.1 is prescribed conflict of interest as well.
Yeah.
The report.
Yeah. In those areas.
On what basis, sorry, Councillor? Is there reference given?
Theme 2 is reference section 1 to the litigation of Barcaldine Mill, which I have been
Sorry.
Theme 2.
Services. Theme 2 on my sheet is transport. Theme 3 is transport, but anyway, yeah.
Theme Down the bottom of that page, you see the services.
Services, yep. Flood mitigation by Calden North. That's not flood mitigation with respect to the recreation park. I don't believe. Is that right, Vlad? No. But if we stay out, maybe it is. So you're declaring that? That's what it is? Okay. Sorry. Any further? Councillor Plum?
Mr Mayor, what was that last one then of council plums?
The rec park mitigation flooding. 361 theme 3.
Theme 2. Down the bottom of the
I think you'll find it's got a separate heading, theme 3. Because of a family member. It was a family member for all three, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Mr Mayor, I inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in item 3.4.5, the minor changes to the development application, through a close associate of my employer, and I've had previously declared PCOIs as my employer was a tenderer for the initial project. It may be a tenderer or a supplier, depending on how council decide to go with the works that are described in the change.
Yep. Any further?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hanson?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr Mayor.
Councillor
Not that
Gleeson?
I'm aware of.
Mr Mayor, I have a prescribed CEO of 3.3.2 and 3.4.5 as I've been told in the past that I'm a supplier of materials to the ski park. So I'll move the room for
So that's 345. Sorry, the first number was
3.3.2.
332.
And if we're discussing the 3.6.1 there that Councillor Plum just raised, I'll throw that in there too, please. I also have a prescribed POI for 3.4.3, which is the one that I've been declaring for the last few meetings, is the footpath in Ford Street, as my name in Ford Street.
All right.
Leaving the meeting for that.
Just for that, that's the only goal. That's the only project, sorry, there.
That I did see, yeah.
So we can have a discussion on that before you leave the room. Okay. I don't have any prescribed conflict of interest that I'm aware of. Does any councillor present wish to draw to the attention of any other councillor any potential overlooked PCOI?
Can I just bring to Councillor Gleeson's attention in the stockground report that there are possibilities there that graders may have an opportunity for permits to occupy to the end that they own. And I just want to raise that with Councillor Gleeson.
Mr Mayor, I certainly thought about it. I'm a little bit hesitant on the decision that we're coming up with today. If it is going to get down to, I'm not really sure what sort of decision we are going to have to make today regarding the software.
So the decision, or the officer's recommendation is that our decision will surround supporting the recommendations that are in the report.
There's 5 recommendations.
That's correct. All 5. That's what the report says. That the recommendations provided in the draft report are supported. Because it's an optioneering document that provides options that are better than the status quo, is the intent of the report.
Mr Mayor, would I have a declarable or a prescribed conflict?
I think if you viewed that there was a potential for you to personally suffer a gain or a loss, then that would be a prescribed. But I'm not a lawyer, so I'm providing that advice free of charge.
I appreciate what Councillor Peebles is saying, and if everybody feels it, again, I should have I can't give the exact number, but I know it's in the
336.
So you might think that. Thank you.
And as a rural landholder, I can just declare that neither of my properties join a stock route. Surbiton's quite some distance from any declared or gazetted route, and Mac Downs has both railway and highway reserves between the route ducts at the North Delta turn off to the south of the railway line. So Mac Downs does not join the reserve. It does join a reserve, not a stock route. Okay. Any declarations of declarable conflicts of interest?
Mr. Mayor, I informed the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest excuse me, in the matter 3.4.3, the project progress report. The nature of my interest is that I built the Lake Dun Sculpture Trail, and that is mentioned in the report. I wish to just participate in receiving the report. However, I acknowledge that eligible councillors must now determine, pursuant to section 150ES of the Act, whether I may participate.
Councillors?
What was it? I couldn't hear the name.
So, in the project progress report, there's reference made to some stopping bays that have been funded to be completed on the sculpture trail.
Yep.
This isn't the first time we've done this, councillors. What do you wish to do with Councillor Rogers in this case? I'm happy to receive the report and Councillor Rogers remain in the room. There's no decisions to be made. I'll move that Councillor Rogers remain in the room for the discussion of the report. Seconded Councillor Hanson. Any debate? Those in favour? Those in favour? Carried. That's 6-0.
Mr. Mayor, do we have any more clarity on when we might be receiving the next round of the 11th member training? It's been put back.
COVID. We were supposed to have done it last week.
Yeah, I've got an email tentatively booked for the 14th of September. Yeah, to confirm, but that was the date they came back with a couple of days.
I wouldn't cancel your September holidays on the basis
Oh,
of
no,
that.
it's not that, Mr. Mayor. I just think there needs to be a bit more work done with the PCOIs and the DCOIs, and how we interpret it, and how the powers above interpret it.
And how each officer that comes and advises us will determine something different. So
Slightly different, yes, Mr. Mayor.
at least it's being done through an abundance of caution. Do you have any more, Councillor Rogers?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Plum, any DCOIs?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I believe I have a DCI on 3.3.2, is the economic development report, as West Tech is mentioned in this report, and I am on the executive committee of that for West Tech Field Days, and on behalf of the other councillors, see fit to stay in the room.
I'm happy to move that Councillor Plum remains in the room for the receiving of that report. Seconded Councillor Gleeson. Debate? There being none, those in favour? Carried 6-0. Councillor Arthur?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hanson? Councillor Gleeson? Councillor Peters? There possibly might be a late agenda matter discussed during one of the officers' reports that Councillor Plum may have, and that's the setting of show holiday dates for 2022, but I'm still going to have a discussion around that offline first, so we'll raise that if we need to. Okay. Confirmation of minutes. Can I have somebody please move that the minutes that have been circulated be received? Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor Arthur. Those in favour, 7-0. Are there any alterations, errors or omissions that councillors would like to raise or identify? In the absence of that, can I have somebody move that they be confirmed? Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor Rogers. Those in favour? 7-0. Councillors, you would have all received offline a direct from concerned business houses piece of correspondence that took the style of a petition almost. I'm just informed that it hasn't actually met our criteria for a petition. I intended to present it today. I'll talk to the chief signatory of that letter and ask whether, if they fix up whatever it is, whether they'd like it to be tabled at a future meeting as a petition. But you will have a copy of it. I'm referring to the letter that was sent regarding the fenced area at the Capricorn Highway rest stop east of Barcaldine. So it hasn't met the criteria that's required for it to be considered a petition. It possibly could be around the fact that nobody actually signed it. It was only...
Yeah, no signatures and no postcodes.
Right, so probably could have waived one, but if they haven't signed it, well... But anyway, I will talk to the chief petitioner if that's wish, and his wish that it be tabled, but we can do so at the August meeting. Right, 3, 2, 1. I move that my report be received. The seconder, Councillor Plum. Those in favour? Carried. Additional notes there. Yesterday was the 60 and better AGM and morning tea, which I attended along with District Manager Barcaldine, Benny, and Councillor Arthur made a grand entrance halfway through the meeting. So just to drop some paperwork off, but he sat down and listened for the rest of it. So you can add that. And in the meeting you'll see reference to correspondence that was sent to Minister Littleproud requesting a meeting. I also did that on behalf of, as you see there, a thank you for funding support to community groups who had received grants through the Minister's office. They both attended those meetings as well. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to have 15 minutes with the Minister, but he's also the local MP, which is more relevant to their funding. So any questions? Oh, sorry, and another function that I attended was a conference last Thursday, Friday and Saturday, my apologies, in Rome. I left Thursday, which is the Australian Livestock Transporters and General Rural Freighters Association. I participated in a panel and gave a address separately to that, surrounding follow-up work to beef roads, but also about the role that local government plays to support heavy transport industries. So that was held in Rome last Friday and Saturday. Any questions?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the AGM at 60 is better. Are we going to look in or ask some questions about the extending of that funding?
Yes.
As it's only the program's been funded until the end of this year.
I still actually, I was aware that we hadn't received it some weeks ago, but I had hoped probably that it had come forward. So the fact that it hasn't, I was going to talk with officers afterwards and perhaps just send a general letter to the Minister reminding him of all of the good things about the project and point out that at this point we have no surety of funding post whatever date the funding concludes, which I'm assuming is the end of December. Okay. So yeah, I did flag that as something to follow up on.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
For the benefit of other councillors, it was pointed out that the funding the state provides for 60 and better is under a contract arrangement. Currently we are about 4.5, 5 months away from the completion of a 3-year contract, and there has been no advice from the state as to whether our application to renew that contract has been successful or not. So we'll just, as I mentioned yesterday, I'd be very surprised, shocked actually, if that funding wasn't continued, but we shouldn't be we should keep our eye on it very closely to make sure it does. Okay, no more questions? Sorry, you'll see the meeting for Susan McDonald, Senator McDonald, was scheduled for the 16th of July. That proceeded as was scheduled, although a little later in the day than was in my calendar because we both went to the wrong building. But anyway, there was several issues discussed, including support for the Barcaldine Renewable Energy Zone or Hub, and not only our current BBRF application, but also an understanding of what future rounds of BBRF, Building Better Regions Fund, will look like, and also a very general discussion about how we need to change our language and our presentation around what success looks like in Northern Australia, whether it be through successful or lobbying for BBRF grants to be approved or on behalf of NAPE applicants. What it is, it's not just as simple as saying economic development. The envoy is very keen to see businesses and local governments actually spell out a vision for what their communities look like and how it's a benefit to those communities, not just simply economic development for the sake of it, because it can be a catch-all phrase that I think Senator McDonald's very keen to see discussion around the tic-tacs, more kids in schools, more livable communities, all of the things, I guess, that was music to my ears, because it's exactly what we've been saying and doing for a considerable period of time with our support material. But I guess if the light's being shone in that direction by senior members of the government, well, that might help people who have been preparing that sort of argument for some time. 331, can I have somebody please move that we receive the report? Councillor Information Correspondence. Councillor Arthur, seconded Councillor Plum. Those in favour? Carried 7-0. Moving through them. Thank you from the Muttaburra Arts and Cultural Lifestyle Group. Maclob. Received with gratification. Councillors, with your permission, I'd like staff to promote heavily this item 2, the notification of the National Farm Safety Education Fund. We have several opportunities to promote that. It's a very small fund, but if somebody in a local capacity, if someone close to us locally can benefit from it, then that should be good. I think we have opportunities through things like the Gazette, our socials, the website. So if we can promote this opportunity, I don't think there'd be any objection, would there, councillors?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I was thinking about this letter and I was wondering the funding for this. Would it be possible to use that funding for... The thing that struck me was that there was 58 on-farm fertilities last year, which is more than one a week. But did anyone see that reported in any news outlet? Like, really, you don't actually see it reported in the media. So no one is really aware that it's that many. And I just wondered if there's a way of maybe funding our local, even our local radio or media outlets, or so that they can actually get that information and report on those deaths. Just report it so that everyone knows that it's happening. Like, I don't know, there's...
I think that could be a question for the people within the program to see whether that fits their criteria for.
Yeah, like, it's just, I don't know about farm education being, like, I know we need it, but I think that one of the big problems is that a lot of farmers don't even know how many deaths there are themselves. Talking
with David about this several months ago, one of the problems around it is, of course, that occupational and workplace health and safety is responsibility of the states. So each of them obviously report within the state jurisdictions what the deaths are. And until, I think it's as recently as only 3 years ago, there was no one pulling that data together in the farm sector. There were other heavy industries, but so one of the outcomes of a review was a fund like this to heighten awareness, but also to develop strategies. So I think what you're saying is probably very pertinent, but it's probably something for someone to take up directly with with the fund, you know, whether they'd fund a public
Fund it.
information campaign,
It's because,
public awareness.
I mean, generally you do hear about the odd farm accident, but it's once a year. I mean, it's really rare that you hear it on the news. So it gives people the impression that it's not happening very often, but it's happening once a week.
There's a lot you don't hear about.
Yeah, and it's the same with deaths of women in domestic violence. There's one every week, but yet on the news we only hear about 2 or 3 of the most, you know, like you don't hear every week that someone's dying, but someone is.
I'm
So,
sure,
yeah.
Councillor Rogers, if you were to put a submission through, that it would be given good consideration.
Yeah, I think it's a
Mr.
good
Mayor,
idea.
the LGAQ has actually put something out today, or yesterday.
On which one, domestic violence or farm safety?
National Farm Safety.
Oh, thank you. Well, we might be able to pick that up and run with that.
Relating to the 24th of July, and I believe I saw something on ABC this morning as well about childhood accidents on farms.
Okay. Well, if others have, if LGAQ started that, there might be some stuff there that we can piggyback on, because we're right in the middle of it. There's a detailed brief there from Craig, our Disaster Management Coordinator, regarding that conference. Unfortunately, I was unable to make it because I had a National Resource Management one 2 days before that in Brisbane, so 4 days. But we had Craig attend on our behalf and summarise it, and there was a number of the briefings that were provided that were sent in a link afterwards that I looked at. So, has anyone got any questions about that? Voices of Hope. Growing Up in Queensland 2020 report. We received that. I wonder whether it would be beneficial to ensure that different state agencies are all communicating with themselves. I wonder if we ensure that all of the schools in our region have visibility of this as well. Perhaps by just forwarding that letter undercover from us. It's as, you know, certainly receive it. We can help disseminate that. Okay, 332, Economic Development Report. Who's leaving the room? Councillor Peebles, you're specifically leaving with respect to the Buckball and Recreation Lake, aren't you?
Yes.
Nothing else? We'll just wait.
Yep.
And Councillor Plum, you declared a COI on the basis of Westec, is that correct? But we gave you permission to stay, so you're fine. So just hold any comments that anyone may have about the rec park until the end, please. Anna, have you got anything other than rec park information to lead us through?
Yes, so we've had, with the new plan for the truck stop development, they've been looking at the traffic numbers, and the current traffic numbers probably don't hit their magic number in order for that particular site to be favourable for their first lot of potential sites that they're targeting around Australia. But it's certainly up there in the second lot of sites that they're looking to develop into the future. So that's positive, but it may take some time before it's actually realised. In terms of the Barkey Red motorbike, we got some feedback from our lawyers who've been in contact with the Department of Transport and Main Roads regarding whether or not the site could be declared not a road, so would be able to have unlicensed and unregistered riders utilising the site. Currently, that advice is unlikely to happen, so their recommendations are that they're licensed riders and operating registered bikes to use the facility. The alternatives are that we apply for a material change of use for the site, but there's some issues about the definition of what the reserve is allowed to be used for that would also need to clarify, and you'd have to exclude all other users from that particular area. So that may just need to change. I don't think it'll stop the project, but I think we'll just change the focus on who will be able to be using the facility. On Friday, the Barkey Red motorbike team is meeting with the Botanical Garden team so they can have a look at the 2 overlaid maps to see if there are any conflicts and what changes may need to be made to the trails. That's
Further to, if you look under the MOU with QUT, the third dot point, Great Artesian Basin Specialist discussion, I had further discussions with Morgan yesterday, and those discussions have been reported. The gist of what's being attempted there is a two-part process. One is to identify trend analysis within bores within our region, to identify what anecdotally we know, and that's that bore levels are rising. But that point, the basis for that is to have the analysis there so that when either industry or local governments go and request more water from their bore systems, or to use it for irrigation, or to use it for town expansion, we've got a scientific basis. That's been provided as part of our MOU. It's not a commissioned work. I think I may have referenced it at the last meeting. I met with on the sidelines of that Natural Resource Management presentation in Brisbane. They were undertaking work to identify trend analysis for the reverse reason down in the Gold Coast hinterland, where there's an oversaturation of bores and water levels are falling significantly, and it's jeopardising several small communities' water security. So for the exact reverse, that the same type of analysis would be beneficial here, and in terms of our conditions underneath the MOU, where we provide mutually beneficial opportunities, I thought for the students in the area that are looking at constantly declining water levels, that reverse would provide them an educational opportunity as much as anything. So there's that, and there's also a honours student undertaking a piece of work around the use of groundwater in rural and remote communities. That piece is a little bit less firm as to whether it will include our region, because that student is relatively advanced, but there'll be some more discussions around that one over the next week or two. We hope to have a number of properties put their hand up as being available for these students to come out and do some baseline analysis of what's there currently. And of course we have our, provided it doesn't impact on operations, we have a number of town bores in Buckle specifically that fit within the remit for what they're looking to do. So that's what that's referring to. It's not a commercial in confidence discussion. It's scientific research that may inform positively future applications for water.
Also, through you, Mr. Mayor, I forgot to mention that with QUT, we've got some feedback from QUT around the banana proposal for looking at growing bananas in the Aramac area. They've come back and advised it's unlikely we'll be able to enter into the organic Cavendish banana market, but there's certainly feasibility that is worthwhile investigating and exploring for the more boutique varieties of bananas, which there's a strong demand for, but there isn't a huge amount grown in the regions.
And did they want to progress that now somewhere?
So that's a decision to be made operationally. It's been provided within the budget, and it's within.
We're still waiting for some more information. There's still a little bit more to work through before they can make a conclusive decision.
So it'll be about a 12-month program with a cost of around about $50,000 to take it to the point that you consider implementing field trial.
Okay. And
which we budgeted for.
Yes.
Yeah, but you say it's an operational decision?
To proceed with the engagement.
Yeah.
It's a budgeted item. And it certainly looks like there's enough value to carry out that work. And it is staged, so you complete, some stages will be run in parallel, but other stages will only be contingent on the outcomes of previous stages, so you can pull up short at any particular point in time as well.
Yep.
Something doesn't stack up halfway through, or you may not have expended all of your research funds.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Barkey Red, so at this point in time, it's looking like will only be accessible to licensed and registered.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, legally, yes.
Because it's unlikely, the advice from the department is it's unlikely the minister would give us
So we've spent $108,000 on it, and it's probably not going to cater to the market that we're looking at. Because my understanding of the idea was it was for trail riders and for
That's exactly what it
for
was.
those people that have spent considerable money on their bikes, and I would say the majority won't be road registered. They may well, most of them are licensed, but they're not road registered bikes.
Well, and there's the age factor as well. It's to cater for
Families.
and young people, and you can't receive a motorbike licence until you get a car licence.
Just the big loss, all of those kids under
16.
grades that are riding bikes now, that's what I thought we were trying to go for, more so than you.
So that's the first I've heard that the department wouldn't say no. I wouldn't rule it out yet, councillors. I haven't personally spoken to the minister, so there's a lot the department will say is what is consistent with their advice that ministers can be lobbied to overturn. We weren't supposed to receive lots of funding from departmental advice that ministers end up granting us, so I wouldn't call it a dead project yet.
And Mr Mayor, along the lines of what Councillor Arthur Price said, you've got underage people riding motorbikes and all these on our commons now.
Correct.
That's an everyday happening. So.
That's correct. I think all of us have been very cognizant of the fact that that's illegal.
And through you, Mr Mayor, it does represent a risk to council,
Yeah.
which is highlighted in the risk assessment that we distributed around the Barkey Red
Why is that
project.
illegal?
Because it's the road.
No, just on the common, not on the road.
I can answer that
Yeah.
question if you like.
Yes.
Because the trails are publicly available and you can ride or drive a motor vehicle, and a motorbike is considered to be a motor vehicle, it's considered to be a road under the definitions of roads.
Doesn't have to be a gazetted roadway.
No, but just your normal commons,
Yep.
which our kids use all the time now, and they, they're up and down creek beds and what have you. That's illegal, is it?
Correct. I've never known it. I've never thought it to be otherwise. It's only the leniency of country coppers that have allowed it to happen, or us not asking for them to enforce it. And in fact, I can point to numerous instances where QPS staff have chosen not to be lenient because of hooliganism, and they have booked them for that exact reason, unregistered, unlicensed, within our council area. There was a fatality within our council area that had some extreme consequences for the family involved, on the basis of.
So how does that roll over into kids riding on, say, your property or Tom's property? How is that different to a common?
I haven't actually sought advice on that, but I know that occupational health and safety conditions are pretty savage. If someone unlicensed, they don't have to be on a registered vehicle property, but they do have to be of age to ride if you want to see a claim. If you want to successfully claim under WHS practices for an injury off one of them.
No, but a claim's different too. Is it okay for them to ride?
Well, it's not okay for anyone under the age of 16 to ride a quad bike, for example. No, that's actually breaking the law. People have been doing it for 20 years, but it's totally illegal.
So will what?
I don't know the answer.
16s.
I think it's the same. I think it's licensed age, but unless they're a member of a motocross club, like there's specific provisions around motocross facilities and for specific training and accreditation processes that minors go through to be considered able to ride. They can't just turn up first day on the job hooning around the track. Like, it really gets to a point I raised probably 4 or 5 months ago when this all came to light. Even the people that are undertaking our common musters for us, handling stock, should be licensed on registered vehicles, because it's a roadway, like it's publicly accessible. See, the definition difference is probably the fact that our properties are not publicly accessible, whereas the common is freely publicly accessible.
You've got some, I think there are motorbikes being sold now with gear open, so you don't have to register them just for rural use.
Oh, it has always been.
Yep.
Correct.
So, I don't know, that's more 250 Hondas.
blinkers and that's correct. A lot of dirt bikes don't have lights, full stop.
So how can they sell something that's not going to be legally allowed to be ridden anyway?
Legally allowed to be registered is a difference. You don't have to buy it if you're going to ride it in an area where it's required to be registered.
But the discussion we just had here, you're not supposed to be riding on properties or...
I didn't say anything about registration on properties. It was licensing for the operator.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that it's the fact that the tracks on the town common are defined as roads under the legislation because they're publicly available. It's where we run into the issues. If you've got tracks on your own private property that is not publicly available, they're not classified as roads.
Okay.
It's solely because it's publicly accessible. If we had fences, gates, and you could only enter with our express permission, you would be able to use your unlicensed and unregistered vehicles, providing you'd have to have some consideration around third-party insurance.
But when you say tracks, the tracks on the common can be a track that is a road, but then you've just got that motorbike path a lot of the times too, so would that be regarded also as a...
Any metre of the common, any square metre of it is defined as a roadway under the purposes of the Act.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, one other item I probably didn't draw attention to, there was a request for us to start looking into the possibility of four-wheel drive park within the region, and our Economic Development Officer has started to have some thoughts around that as well. But it would probably require a separate paper and conversation as to whether or not to proceed any further and what role council would like to take in further developing an idea like that.
Barcaldine Renewable Energy Zone, we've discussed that. Sorry.
Through Mr. Mayor, just adding to what Councillor Peck was just saying, anybody that's driving cattle along stop routes, those persons who are riding bikes there, those bikes, the drivers' bikes supposedly can be registered, and everybody is to have a licence and wear a helmet on the floor.
Even if, yeah, and that's the case, they can book them even if they're not on the actual roadway. If they're just within the reserve, they're exposed. Yes?
Can I just ask something? With regards to the truck stop development, which I presume is the one that's on Longridge Road.
Yeah.
Has the government been updated on what's happening?
Well, has there been any change since their last update?
Mayor, I spoke to the game club this week, Monday, and just gave them an update on where we're at.
That's okay, because I was thinking.
All right, Councillor Pickles, can you please? Rec Park. Questions or any comments? Lead with first.
So Queensland Rowing is looking at coming out on the afternoon of 12th of August. They've got a outback rowing regatta being held up in Longridge, so they're going to take advantage of that to come out and have a look at the rec park and provide some additional advice around what type of rowing craft would be suitable on the lake. There's been some interest from the water skiing fraternity, and they're looking at coming out potentially on the weekend of the 5th and 6th of January to have a come and try day, and they're looking at then holding their first round of competition the following weekend as well. So that should generate some interest for the rec park.
Questions? Okay, Councillor Wood. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, are we planning on having the bush councils out at the lake on that weekend?
It won't be on the weekend, but there's a number of matters to be resolved around operation, whether it's a building site, a work site, power availability. So there's still some, I'd say it's 50-50. Probably not even that, actually, depending on an outcome of a later agenda item.
So, Mr. Mayor, sorry, I just missed the date of the scheme,
The 5th
the
and
wood scheme and the railing, the wood scheme, were they only coming out to have a look?
5th and 6th of January, they're going to come out and have a come and try day.
It's just in January, so
And then the following weekend, they'll be looking at holding their first round competition.
I missed the date. Thank you very much. Is it appropriate to ask the question when the
yeah, well, we haven't actually decided whether we're even doing it or not yet. And there's a councillor present who's got to leave before we talk about that. So,
Thank you.
could you grab Councillor Peoples for me, please? Sorry. Thank you.
He's something out for that.
There's a fair bit of wind out there by the look of the trees. It's freezing here. I'm just frozen and cold.
It's almost hard to concentrate.
District Manager Lawrence, I've just discovered why it is that you've decided to use the other side of the room. It had nothing to do with the staff from the office seeing you at all. It was because it's freezing on this side. All right. Well played. 333. Councillor attendance at the Bush Council's convention. Oh, my apologies. Could I somebody please move that we receive the economic development report? Councillor Hanson, Councillor Gleeson, carried 6-0. Our policy says to attend whatever the phrase exact is, mandatory. Sounds like mandatory detention, doesn't it? We need a formal council resolution. We are negotiating with LGAQ because you won't all be just sitting in the auditorium watching, actually doing what delegates do all day. You will have each of you dedicated roles at times, meeting people at the airport, dropping them back. So you won't be paying full, but we just need a resolution that means you can all go and we can recover the cost of whatever that is, or have appropriate authority to expend money, on your attendance for things like meals. The one thing we are going to need a fixed number on, not today, not in the meeting, but is the amount of people that are attending the dinner, because it's a seated, catered event. So Angela's going to need to know that a little closer, but this is a covering resolution to authorise that you are allowed to attend. Councillor Plum, Councillor Peoples. Any opposition? Those in favour? 7-0. Operational plan 334. Anna?
So we're required to produce an operational plan each financial year to highlight the activities that we're going to be undertaking in the next 12 months, and those activities are to align with achieving the ultimate aim of the 5-year corporate plan. So it is as presented. I'm happy to take any questions or concerns.
Normally, councillors, we adopt this with the budget, but because we handed down a new corporate plan, as I mentioned to you previously, the new corporate plan determines the manner in which your operational plan is developed. So we had to approve one before we could approve the other. And these, like the plan and the budget, can be adopted. Can be amended at a time. They're just adopted today, and that's the direction the officers work with until such time as we amend it or they complete their tasks. The mover, Councillor Plum, seconded. Hanson, debate. Those in favour? 7-0. 335, review of the financial assistance grants allocation methodology. Councillors, you have my full permission to use the acronym FAGS. We all know what you're talking about. I'm going to ask, I'll just give you a brief intro to this, and then ask Anna, who's been part of the working group and has developed some of these responses, to provide some more feedback, or more, I mean, it's a pretty detailed report in and of itself. And then following Anna, then I had a conversation yesterday with David Arnold, our Executive Officer at Rapid, who's resolved a few concerns that I had about it. But fundamentally, this is our biggest non-discretionary grant allocation that we receive every year. It's integral to Council's continued operations. It's currently in the order of $7 million. Because of our population decline, it dipped slightly year on year, this year to last year, or the period that we're receiving payment for. And the years seem to no longer matter. We seem to, some years get half in June, other years we get it all in July. Then it's more to do with the federal government moving $1 billion off their books than anything to do with what it does for our financial methodology. But at the moment, we're still receiving in the order of $7 million. There are elements, as you would have seen in the report, of the total FAGS allocation to Queensland that have mandated federal government minimum contributions that must be made. And then there is the remaining portion, which is allocated via a methodology established by the Grants Commission. No, Local Government Grants Commission, on my apologies, there is a difference. That review has been underway for a little while, but it's very time sensitive. The Local Government Grants Commission intends to release, or perhaps even the Minister, a final determination at the Local Government Conference to be held in October. So AEC has been commissioned by, as this report says, the three rocks from the southwest to the northwest to review the methodology and provide advice on what alterations to that may be beneficial to us. It's at that stage that I have a great amount of trepidation, because I know that we've been trying to grow the overall allocation, the pie, for want of a better analogy, and at the moment that looks stuck because the coalition's not in favour of it. However, the Federal Labor Party has adopted a policy to restore FAGs to 1% of federal taxation. Of course, that doesn't have a time frame attached to it, and indeed, if they aren't successful in the next election, it won't be for another 3.5 years. But if we review the methodology in absence of growing the pie, every single positive change will affect a negative change on a council somewhere else. And I don't believe local government should be fighting each other for the money. We need to be fighting the people that feed us. It's the problem we see all the time with competitive grant applications like BBRF or BOR. There's winners and losers. The one thing about FAGs is there's no losers. Everybody wins. But if we change the methodology, specifically the one that concerns me the most is the methodology about road length. I think Barcaldine will be right, because we're the 11th longest road network in the state. So you would suspect that if it changed around things like road length, which are referenced in here, as opposed to vehicle traffic, probably going to be very good for Barcaldine. But the trade-off will be the counter-argument from those councils who lose. And one of the things that we have asked to give consideration to are councils or local government areas with more than one township, and where those townships are quite remote from each other, which by anyone's definition would be the case for Barcaldine Regional Council. So if we wanted to get that through, that's going to take money off of one community local government. And the closest example of that to us is Winton, for example, who have only one urban community in their entire LGA. Now, the change may be negligible in real terms to Winton, and consider it to us. There's not enough advanced modelling to really see, and there's not enough time or, to be frank, money to undertake what every single change in the methodology will deliver to each local government to really line that up. There's only one body who can do that, and that's the Local Government Grants Commission. So broadly speaking, I have some concerns about the holistic approach, because even within the three rocks, there's substantially different LGAs. You've got Mount Isa and Maranoa, for example, like they have got nothing in common realistically other than their supposed isolation with local governments such as the Barcoo and Diamantina. However, through geography, they're in our rocks, and if there's no chance of growing the pie and some possibility of our council winning, this considered submission, whilst politically it could be quite damaging, is probably the best chance we've got of getting that. So reluctantly, I think it's something my thoughts or consideration on it would be that we do support what's in here, notwithstanding that we may not agree with every element of what's here, and in fact we may even have counter opinions to. I'm going to go to Anna, and there's still the possibility to feed back into this process. The Grants Commission gave AEC and the Three Rocks 2-week extension, so it should have already been submitted, I believe, last Friday.
Yes, so as a council, we provided a submission last Friday from our perspective, and the reason why we did that, Councillor Rogers can probably confirm as well. When we were at the Western Queensland Alliance of Council conference a few months ago, there was concern that the Queensland Local Government Grants Commission had received a submission from LGAQ requesting that the value of bags increases, but their feeling was they weren't too sure as to whether or not that represented the view of all councils, because individual councils hadn't provided their own submissions to support that. So therefore, I felt it of value that council provided their own individual submission as well. We did have a slight variation to what the Western Queensland Alliance of Council draft is proposing, and that was around the minimum grant. But most certainly...
Well, we can tease that out, councillors, for you. Do I have it here? No. My concern, so there's 11 local governments that received the minimum grant in Queensland, so they're predominantly the 11 biggest population centres, not areas, but the 11 biggest, and generally population indicates income. That's a very crass and rudimentary statement, but effectively that's what it is. They're big enough, they get a minimum grant, and the rest of the methodology doesn't apply to them. There's a proposal around whether a couple of or some additional councils have met that criteria to be considered minimum grant councils, purely on the basis that I can't see that being accepted by those local governments without a considerable fight, and the state government currently looking at those councils and listening to an argument from 20 of us out here as opposed to where those two are, I see it as being detrimental to ask for it. And I asked Anna in our submission to indicate that we would support additional minimum grant councils only if the base allocation of FAGs increased, so that those councils would still receive more than they're currently receiving, but then they would move to the minimum grant. If they move to minimum grant now, with no more coming into the plate, they go backwards, and substantially. And I don't think that's fair. But that was the position that I took on that, was that this adding more to the minimum grant when they have challenges the same as we do, different challenges, different complexities, but they've still got massive challenges around dealing with what they have to deal, and that's what FAGS is developed specifically to identify, is the growing areas of council, or the areas of councils that need support on the basis of either isolation or Indigenous population, or and some of those LGs have got that latter point that's a significant impact for them. So I just didn't think that it warranted it unless the base allocation from the federal government was increased. So that's the difference there, chiefly on our submission to what was presented.
So we've sent a submission down. Has any other councillor seen it?
We only sent it last Friday. I only saw it last Thursday.
So, but has any other councillor seen it?
I don't think so. We discussed it at the Rapid Forum the Friday before, and it had to be submitted within 7 days.
So if it's a Barcaldine Council submission, don't you think we should see it?
I can get you a copy of it, definitely.
No, it's a bit late now.
Basically, it supports everything that's in front of you here. That's what it is.
I'm not sure that I do support that we don't have. Like, it's all right to say, Sean, that we grow the pie, but we've been trying to grow the pie for a long time. Mr. Mayor, my apologies. But I don't know, maybe some of these ideas with regards to, you know, the minimum from some other councils, I don't think there's going to be any change for us remote council. You know, to say that we wait for a change of the bag allocation to 1%, we've been waiting for that for a long time.
We have.
So I just don't. For
the first time ever, the National Local Government Association unanimously supported it. That has never happened in history.
Yes,
so that puts incredible pressure on the federal government. Now, when they realise they have an entire sector completely convinced, plus the opposition, the dominoes are falling slowly. Like before the last federal election, both sides of Parliament politics said, no, we will not be increasing fags. Now, we've chipped away and got one over.
Yeah, the one that's in power at the moment still isn't agreeable to it.
That's correct.
Yeah. But Mr. Mayor, in all of that, you know, I've probably got a differing opinion to you, but I still think that councillors should see a submission from council before it goes.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was a timing issue. We weren't given a great deal of time to provide our submission, and a lot of our submission was based on information that was gleaned from the AEC report, because AEC was able to have the resources, the qualified and skilled resources to actually go in there and have a look at some of the background information, which we would not have been able to, we wouldn't have been privy to or been able to actually understand and interpret to be able to put in our submission. So that was one of the reasons why we weren't able to bring it to this council meeting.
I understand you can't get it to council, but if you had something ready to go, just flick it to us and say, look, this is what we think we're going to send down. Can you give us an answer in 24 hours or overnight or whatever you want us to do? And if we can, we can. If we can't, but I still think we should need, if we're going to send a submission as important as this, I think the 7 of us make the decision.
So, with respect to the road?
So, with respect to the road, the modelling undertaken by AEC indicates that the Western Queensland councils will be better off if we just drop to 1 kilometre and take out the population. One of the arguments associated with that is also we've got denser populations, less road, and particularly less unsealed road networks. Your population allows you to have a greater allocation for road funding, which doesn't necessarily reflect the cost associated with maintaining those road networks, because they're maintaining sealed road networks as opposed to our unsealed road networks. And generally speaking, when you look at the whole of life costing of unsealed roads, particularly in areas that are impacted by wet weather, it can be significantly higher over the whole of life than it is for a sealed road network, particularly a sealed road network where you've got really good drainage as well.
So
the
yep.
estimate, I do see clarity around what impact would that have for Barcaldine Regional Council, and I was advised it would be in the order of $1 million.
1,013,000. So that table. Yeah. positive.
So they did modelling based on a number of different criteria, and that $1 million positive is provided no other criteria is applied to the roads distribution.
One thing that would concern me is a thing they give voice to on the road costs, because they prepare a number of different, in this submission, a number of different options around roads. One they talk about is heavy vehicles and the allowances for them. Whilst as a proportion of users on our road, heavy vehicles are exponentially higher. In gross numbers, the numbers of heavy vehicles in these western areas can't ever be expected to compete with the likes of Isaac, Central Highlands, North Burnett, South Burnett, Maranoa, Charters Towers. So that one concerned me, that where they reference. So I mean, I think I'd support the lineal length stuff's pretty clear, but with the weighting or an extra weighting given to heavy vehicles, it's only going to steer more money into those more densely, heavily industrialised councils.
So we, through you, Mr Mayor, we have looked at the vehicles. So at the moment, Main Roads has an 8-to-1 vehicle allowance for road trains compared to light vehicles. There has been some commentary in the AEC report about increasing that, but we believe when you look at your loading on your wheels and the like, it's 8-to-1 is a reasonable number. Our submission actually highlighted the fact that it's not so much the number of road trains that are using our roads, but it's more the fact that our roads were never designed or constructed to allow road trains to be on them. So they're causing more damage than what they would be causing if road trains were back in the days when we actually designed and constructed our roads. So that's where our cost increases come in.
So with that, has there been any further advice back since that conversation's been had from AEC other than what we see here? Has this been updated to reflect where they are going to land?
We haven't received an update, so we have to provide them with our feedback.
Yeah.
And
then
based
they
on
come
that
back.
feedback, they'll come.
Because part of it, as you see there on page 10, they're saying that the conversion rate for a road train is 60-to-1 or 80-to-1. That's going to skew so that my concern is those other councils, they have more trucks than we have and more cars on their local government roads. So when they get a weighting of 60 or 80-to-1 for those trucks, plus the 100 more cars a day that they get, that really, we'll get a little tiny bit more, but we're still only talking about the same bucket of money again. We haven't grown the bucket of money simply because we changed the allocation. So something's got to fall off somewhere if the truck allocation is so big and so heavy, because those councils will rip big dollars out of us on that measure alone. The only exception would be the number of, the only little help for Barcaldine is that every one of our local government roads, apart from a few streets, are type 2 road trains, whereas a lot of those others are type 1s, but just the frequency of what they have is tenfold over ours.
So yes, through you, Mr Mayor, I'd recommend updating the resolution to also include limiting the ratio of road trains to light vehicles to the 8-to-1.
Well, that's just my thoughts, councillors. Where are you at with that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, so that 8-to-1 is similar to what TMR use. So is that based on equivalent standard axles, basically?
Through you, Mr Mayor, and it would also take into consideration of the load that's actually placed on the road at any one point. So while the mass may be greater, significantly greater than a light vehicle, so too are the number of wheels. Yes, so then your mass per wheel, it allows that spreading. So therefore we believe the 8-to-1 is more reasonable, with commentary around the fact that the roads weren't designed. So therefore we would expect them to cost more to maintain.
You know, there's a very specific reason for axle loading on a road. It's to limit that exact thing, the damage to the road. I mean, if there's overloaded, well, they're breaking the law. We can't accommodate for that. 120 tonne is also a type 2 configuration, not a type 1, which not all of the LGs have access to. So if anything, it would be perhaps an additional or a divided road train box, type 1s and type 2s, because there is a slightly different impact. But any more thought on the suggestion to ensure that the...
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
why don't we just go on the road length without any reference to traffic?
Well, I think probably whoever's putting this document together, the way I read it's trying to hedge their bets and say that the lineal road length's not going to get up. So if it doesn't, we need a more fine-tuned process.
But it's road length now, isn't it?
No, that's only 60%. They want to change road length to 100%.
Okay.
And through you, Mr Mayor, is that broken into sealed and unsealed?
Yeah. Yes.
Not to put you on the spot.
But
Mr.
yes,
Mayor,
but there's also town and rural,
rural and
urban and rural. So there's different, totally different, and might even be a third category.
plus in a geographical area like Barkey Regional Council, we've got considerably different roads and the ability for them to hold a road train up after 5 mil rain or 10 mil rain or...
Totally different. You got,
Some you wouldn't go anywhere with 5 mil, some you go an inch.
It doesn't break it. The data doesn't break down between sealed and unsealed.
so
And
Now in your return is just vehicle. Rural roads, less than 40 vehicles a day. Rural roads, 40 to 150 vehicles per day. And then urban roads, less than 500 vehicles a day. They also do bridges, culverts, floodways.
So it says in the definition that differential cost per kilometre for urban roads versus rural roads, as you just said, and at different levels of usage, as you just said, with costs adjusted according to climate, soil subgrade and population density. So how do they derive that soil subgrade, and do we get about 6 different goes at that? That might be a geographical overlay, not something we submit.
Because we don't submit that.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So it's not a
Mr.
sealed
Mayor,
basis.
that's
I knew there was a
certainly-
reference to subgrade.
certainly being a flavour of the methodology review was greater reliance on non-council provided data. So we've certainly provided feedback around the fact that council supplied data is typically audited and therefore should have some weight compared with non-local government provided data. And in many cases, no one else is really collecting the data that we're collecting and providing through to them.
Can someone explain horizontal equalisation?
It's a tough one. I'll give Anna a shot at it first.
Context there.
You go first, Anna.
So it's essentially allowing, irrespective of the number of people that live in your township community, how wealthy they are, how close they are to everyone else, that everyone should be entitled to essentially a minimum standard of service. So through the allocation of FAGs, it's about directing money towards councils that may not have the population base to support the provision of basic services or the average standard of services into their communities. Because they may not have the money to run the libraries, provide the sports and recreational facilities such as swimming pools and the like, if they solely relied on their local ratepayer base to fund those activities.
Okay, so our submission along those lines, in the submission that we just sent in, did we make mention of the gaps that we have to fill, like running banks?
Yes,
That was mentioned?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, we certainly did. So there's another one which is effort neutrality, and it's about councils not being rewarded for their policy decisions that they make, i.e. to have a higher level of service than the average, or to provide services that aren't defined or aren't essentially considered as core services.
And that's called effort neutrality.
It's called effort neutrality. So certainly in our submission back to them, we spoke about how sometimes council may have to make a decision, but that's because of policy decisions made by other levels of government, or in fact also including the private sector as well. So they've removed services from the community. So council essentially has to step in. So we've referenced that. And the other factor that we've referenced is that a regional council such as Barcaldine, where it's got 5 regional townships, that's not really taken into consideration. We're only considered on our total population, not population per township.
And the services that we have to duplicate in those townships, you've made that point.
Yeah, given the distance and the lack of public transport and the like. So people might argue that, well, it might take you an hour and a half to travel to your swimming pool in the Gold Coast area because of where you live, but there are ways and means in which you can travel, whereas here it's very difficult because if you live in Aramac and you've got to travel down to Barcaldine, there is no...
And it's the expense of the council to supply each of those services in each of those communities, which...
So we felt it important that that point be made because we are very unique in the Western Alliance with respect to that. If you look across the north, they're one town shires, like most of them never even got touched by amalgamation, for goodness sake. And even within Rapid, Blackwell's 2, Winton's 1, Longridge is 3 by its own count, and the rest are, you know, relatively small. So we wanted to highlight, it's been a long-standing point for me that our population, if you take away the number of towns we've got and say we've got a population of 3,000, but of course most of them live, half of them live on a property, but just look at our gross population and then look at, say, and I'll pick on them, let's look at, say, Rockhampton, population 10 times that. They've got 1 swimming pool, we've got 5. They've got 1 library, we've got 5. Like, do you say we've got 5 swimming pools to service 3,000 people without looking at that context of it? That's where council, under the current and previous interpretations of effort neutrality, wouldn't have got any consideration for that because they would say, well, that's a policy setting of council to provide 5 swimming pools for 3,000 people. But we're saying that it's not, because it's not, we don't have a population of 3,000 people, we've got 5 communities. We're decentralised in the basis of those population, and we should be recognised because those people are, under the horizontal equalisation, those people are entitled to a minimum level of care. They're required, like, so we've got 5 treatment sewage plants, like, admittedly they're different scale, 3 of them, 2 water treatment plants, admittedly they're totally different scale to the ones that would provide the major urban centres that I unfairly picked on one of before, but we still operate them remotely, so we need staff duplication, we need asset duplication to the extent that neither the effort neutrality or the horizontal equalisation currently, we believe, recognises that. So there is a slight definition on page 3 of that report for those 2 complicated phrases. I questioned in a hookup Friday a week ago this exact point with the Grants Commission about effort neutrality and how that balances, and there was a mixed reaction from within. So Paul Bell's the chair of it, gave instant recognition to what I was talking about, but then the departmental people that have seconded onto the commission with him sort of were a bit ambivalent about whether that was a true concern or a point that can be truly recognised and captured. But they did say, all 3 of them did say, that at times not every element of a FAG's methodology can be completely applied as per its definition. So that's why there's cases to be made. And that's what we thought was very imperative, that we had a substantial difference to the other LGAs that needed to be highlighted without necessarily being adversarial to them. It's just not something that the rest of the 3 rocks would have said was probably as big an issue for them as, say, road length. It's clearly something that takes up almost 5 pages of the report, road length to them is a fundamental concern. We gain $1 million out of it if it happens, is the modelling. So it's obviously beneficial to us, but our concern was based around the lack of recognition on that basis.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's something that we need to look at and try and, change the methodology in flags to look at the 5 towns or shires or councils that have got more than one community.
A lot of the other communities, a lot of the other local governments that were amalgamated that ended up with numerous communities had a major population base. So the most obvious one to pick on would be Central Highlands. They have emeralds, but yes, they have the satellite communities of Springshaw and Capella and I hesitate to call Blackwater a satellite community, but it's substantially smaller in permanent population than Emerald, and Dingo and Jeringa and Bohinia. And so the largest centres in Blackwater and Emerald contribute significant support, but then they've also got probably 6 swimming pools, might have 7, so that they would benefit from an approach in this respect. But they also benefit from having those 2 concentrated population centres, which really rapidly built council's financial position in their case.
So are we going to make those similar cases in this rapid document?
We've asked. I have anyway. I just don't think it's getting the traction because it's not a rapid document. Rapid's contributing to the Western Queensland Alliance. So we're not just one of 7, we're one of 22.
Yeah.
And the other 21 really don't care. Sorry, in case one of them watches this, they probably do. It's just not as front of mind for them as some of the other issues they raise.
Yes, and through you, Mr Mayor, certainly when AEC was going through their report, there was a huge diversity in thought, which you'd expect when you look at the number of councils that are included in that Western Queensland Alliance of Council and the diversity there is between those councils.
It's too big. It's too big a group, as I've argued for too long. The safety of numbers means that it also, the security of numbers that Western Queensland Alliance purports to represent means that it encapsulates such vastly diverse councils in its mix that may not all be So I guess the document's trying to elect those areas where the methodology can be reviewed that doesn't have a negative impact on any of them. That they're potentially picking the safer options, whereas a smaller group of councils, in fact, even an individual council, may be able to go it alone on some of those points, as we sought to do.
So has this come to us asking for us to give some feedback?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we're to endorse that we be a party to this submission,
yes.
And specifically we've asked about horizontal equalisation, and Anna just added a secondary point to that, which was around
the trucks.
Yep. No,
clarifying
8 to 1, and
you'll put some covering detail with regards to what we're talking about with the point 1 there, Anna?
which is to 5 towns.
yes, it'll be expanded out more in our submission back to.
So I think that's very important.
Any further discussion? Are we all comfortable with adding the piece in around or reaffirming that we support the methodology reflecting TMR's approach to an 8 to 1? I just think we've got to be careful we don't try and reinvent the wheel and come up with. We've received briefings in this chamber from the Local Government Grants Commission in the not too distant past, admittedly different commissioners. Very clear advice was don't mess with the methodology. It's taken a long time to get right. And now, in the absence of more money, and Councillor Peebles, I note your point that we've been chipping away at it for a long time, but I haven't given up the hope that, and I still think that's by far and away the best outcome, is to grow the pie, because we all win then. And we'll win better than we will by tinkering with methodology. If we double the fags, or go from 0.55 to 1%, we have a 45% increase. I'm sorry. We double the amount we're receiving. So even on current methodology, we go from 7 million to 14 million.
But so does everyone across the state.
Exactly. But just because they win doesn't mean that we don't. Whereas if we gain $1 million in road length, we're going from 7 million to 8. And if we get a few shillings thrown our way because horizontal equalisation's given a little bit more weighting, we might go from Even if we went from 8 to 10, we're getting $3 million more, whereas we could have been getting $14 million more if we stayed united on the 1%. Which I'm not suggesting this will say we won't stay united on, but it probably allows chinks in the armour if we all start squabbling.
I can't see how there'd be any change to, well, the majority of local governments chasing the 1%.
I would agree. So if we add in there, please, Debbie, that we road costs considerations give have you got something actually written?
No, I don't.
Oh.
Maybe it reflects an 8-to-1 road train to light vehicle ratio.
Yeah.
And
Which is consistent with TMR's modelling, Mr Mayor,
yes,
words to that effect.
Yeah.
and local government unsealed road networks. Unsealed road networks were not designed or constructed for road trains.
Do we say all? Just there might be some newer ones that perhaps have been.
Maybe and generally.
Yeah.
And generally local government unsealed roads.
Okay.
Let's go back to horizontal equalisation again.
Mm.
Just with those points we've made I'm true with the one about banking and how we fill that out. But when you look at, probably some of our smaller councils employs plumbers, carpenters, rural land helpers or something that aren't probably... They're
mentioned in here. RLOs are.
The other big one is the housing we do provide for our staff, for education staff, policing staff, the housing gap that we have to fill, so that we can provide services in our communities now is also enormous.
I thought housing was referenced, but I'm probably confused. There's a housing study underway too, and that might be.
That's right.
That's probably where that is. Sorry.
Let me double check. So that was in Appendix D.
No, were.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think that can still be taken into consideration with the horizontal equalisation and the fact that council has to step in and make policy decisions as a result of policy changes by other forms of government and the public sector.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, the other point, and it is mentioned in there, is that recoverable works revenue being included as revenue. And
we made that point last Friday very clearly.
Really, it shouldn't be included because it should only be the net income that we receive.
Through you,
those works.
Mr Mayor, we called that out in our own submission, and it's also addressed in the
Q7.
Western Queensland, number 6. They actually talked about on the revenue side, that if they're going to have a revenue side, it needs to have a corresponding cost side as well. So we've called that out both in our submission and that'll be covered off in this submission as well, if we choose to go with it.
Yeah, so it says sales and recoverable works. This income simply offsets expenditures on a full cost recovery basis, and therefore the net effect on the operating position over time will be nil, if both the income and expenditure items are excluded from QLGGC's assessment. So we've pointed that out, or that submission has. Okay, are we comfortable to support this? Do I have a mover? Councillor Rogers. Seconder? Councillor Plum. Any debate? Those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 7-0. And with that, we'll break for some sun.